training volunteers as well on what to do. And we have certain scenarios. We could have a major medical situation. It could be one of the members of the staff, during the overnight shift, and someone being able to grab that manual and look to see how do we respond. It could be a third party security officer.
HOA Insights, common sense for common areas, exists to help all 2 million volunteer board members nationwide have the right information at the right time to make the right decisions for their future. This podcast is sponsored by 4 companies that care about board members: Association Insights in Marketplace, Association Reserves, Community Financials, and Kevin Davis Insurance Services. You'll find links to their websites and social media in the show notes.
Welcome back to HOA's Insights, Common Sense for Common Areas. I'm Robert Nordlund, and I'm here today with a special guest to discuss strategies for keeping your homeowners safe in emergencies. This is episode 24, and before I make the introduction to our guest expert, I want to encourage everyone to check out episode number 23, which was a great discussion with regular co-host and insurance expert Kevin Davis on ideas how to pay for the high cost of insurance. Now, if you missed any other prior episodes, take a moment after this episode to subscribe to this podcast on any of the most popular podcast platforms. You can also listen from our podcast website, which is www.hoainsights.org, or watch on our YouTube channel. And if you have a hot topic, a crazy story, or a question you'd like to have us address, please leave us a voicemail message at 805-203-3130, or send us an email at podcast@reservestudy.com. Well, today it's my pleasure to welcome Arielle Hansford to the program. Arielle is Vice President High Rise with First Service Residential in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. She has 20 years of community management experience and has managed a wide variety of associations, and I was enjoying those stories just before we started the recording. Arielle has been an active volunteer with the Washington Metropolitan Chapter of the Community Associations Institute since 2007 and is a past president of that large chapter. She's currently chair of their Strategic Business Partner Task Force and a co-chair of CAI National's High Rise Managers Workshop, which is where I met her. Arielle, so welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, Robert.
Well, I thought we could start today's program by taking a moment to address the question of wildfires. Boards are busy running the affairs of the association, but with memories of the wildfires that pretty much destroyed the Maui town of Lahaina still fresh in our minds, this is a good time to talk about emergency planning.
Okay.
You want to start out with types of emergencies, or you want to jump right into wildfires?
Totally up to you. Absolutely up to you.
Let's do wildfires.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I'm here in the DC metro area, so I don't have a ton of experience with wildfires. We do up in the Shenandoah Mountains, we do get some wildfires. I think it's important that a community, either they're investing both in prevention and in water management systems that are going to help them with preventing destruction, preventing injury, and hopefully death as well. Of course, having a well thought out, robust emergency response system is crucial. And being able to test that, I think that's vital to the process.
Let me take you down a couple of paths here.
Sure.
We've been speaking about insurance also the last few episodes, and I'm thinking that this is going to be a dual benefit, because if you're preparing for wildfires, that means you're cutting back the shrubs, the bushes, the vegetation away from the perimeter of the association. And that probably has an insurance benefit to the association also, in addition to a life safety benefit. Would you feel that's fair?
I agree.
Okay. And then there's some areas that are more prone to this type of emergency or another. But before we were speaking today, before we started recording, we were talking about 2 different types of emergencies, and I like the way you categorized them: man-made and natural. Can you take us down that path?
Yeah, absolutely. So often we talk about natural disasters, but but really there are many types of disasters and emergency situations. And so we have natural disasters and weather events, right? So a natural disaster could be an earthquake, a volcano, weather events, hurricanes.
Hurricanes in Florida.
Yeah, absolutely. Hurricanes in Florida. Of course, the dry spells, and that, of course, being the catalyst for so many wildfires. We have also technological and man-made disasters. These could be industrial accidents. It could be explosion nearby, a fire, chemical spills, structural failure and collapse, and that could be nearby. We also have social and civil emergencies. So that could be active shooter or a mass shooting, and then cybersecurity incidents. Civil unrest, we see that, and especially in the last several years. It could be a citywide or even a statewide power outage and blackout. Think about New York, what they went through several summers ago. And then, of course, the water supply disruptions. That's a huge one. So environmental and health emergencies, right? So hazardous material incidents or a health emergency that could be pandemic or biological. And then, of course, we have those specific to the community, whether it's for a high-rise building, it could be mechanical failures or elevator entrapments, and then it could be structural issues as well that are happening. So that's really how I like to break it down when I think of it. Let's not just think about weather. Let's try to think about what happens in the areas that we're in.
Yeah. When I'm thinking about the news, we had, was it a year or two, we had an active shooter in a high-rise in Atlanta. And then we had a big train derailment in, looking at my map on the side of my office here, in Ohio, just I think a few months back. So again, not just the things at your association, but when any of those things happen, it's going to disrupt the fire department, it's going to disrupt law enforcement. And when there's an active shooter, boy, the police collapse on that area of town. And if that's where you live, even within a block or two, you're going to have a hard time getting home. So all these related issues, it doesn't have to be your particular association.
Yeah, that absolutely. I mean, so then, and that's where, disaster and emergency preparation come in. It's thinking about those things that could happen. It's making sure that we're identifying those issues that are more likely to happen in the areas that we're in, right? Do your homework when it comes to this. We talked about several, when we were chatting ahead of coming on, but I think talk to others and find out what they're preparing for in the area too. I think sometimes just picking up the phone or sending an email to your neighboring community or those in the area to find out how they plan for all of these things, all of these different scenarios can really help. It can make it a lot less work. And again, I like the idea of planning for the unexpected, not the unknown.
You got my brain spinning here, and I'm like usual writing a lot of notes. When our office power goes down, when my office internet goes down, I know where my plan B is. I can pop across the freeway, get to a Starbucks. I can get their internet there. I can go to an alternate office of mine. I can, hopefully within just a few miles, get power. But if you have a particular incident at, let's say, a high-rise, you're familiar with high-rises, maybe you have your neighbor property that you just have a welcome agreement with so that your owners can go across the street and plug in and charge their phones or get some Wi-Fi or take advantage of their community room to work on their laptop. Do you see that happening much?
Absolutely. I think having good relations with neighboring communities, as well as municipalities, sometimes there is, there's a facility right down the street for larger emergencies. I think that it really is beneficial having places for people to go. So whether these are assembly points or or they really are a location for people to get their work done and to shelter for a while. We did have a potential active shooter situation in one of our communities last year. And the community next door, they allowed any residents that were coming home, as well as some of those that evacuated when they heard it was happening, they let them stay there in their clubhouse and common area. And it was, it really was so beneficial for us knowing where folks were, for the emergency personnel that were trying to make sure that they had the best control of the situation as possible. And of course, it in the end, it made them much closer neighbors, I would say, that they have such a, that experience is like no other situation.
Yeah. Well, when you have a crisis, it can be an incredibly bonding event. And I love the idea of us describing our industry as community associations. Hopefully there is that community. And if I have electricity in my home and the building across the street doesn't, I am wide open saying, come on over, charge your stuff, grab some internet. It's a natural when you have something of abundance that is for someone else so scarce. Let's talk about that idea of assembly points. My son is in the military. He calls it a rally point, where you would go. So how do you communicate this to the homeowners? Is this something that you have as part of ongoing normal board meetings, or at an annual meeting? You talk about the library down the street, the police station, the building a quarter mile down the road. These are primary points where you can have a list of, I'm here, I'm safe. How do you develop that?
It's a great point, because it depends on the type of association as well. So whether you're an HOA or a condominium or a high-rise building, evacuating a high-rise is generally quite different than evacuating an HOA. I think for various situations, having meetup points, that knowing exactly where they're going to be, getting those out to residents. I think it's something that you as soon as you're rolling these things out, start talking with the residents about it. Have the normal cadence, just like you train your staff, where you're bringing folks together to talk about these plans and where these meeting points are. Show them, give them maps. You can do that, have, just like we would have a large binder prepared for our desk. We'd have copies of that as a management team. The board should have that. And there should be something similar that we're going to give to residents. It can be part of the welcome packet. It can be right there on the association's website, really easy to get to. But I think talking about those, right? We want to make it as easy as possible for them to, as you say, find their rally point, and also find emergency shelter if that's necessary too. If we're having a major weather event, it's raining and we need to make sure that they're getting somewhere that's high off the ground, right? We're not meeting in the park down the street. Right. We should know what that looks like.
Yeah. So maybe you have a short list of meetup points or these assembly points.
Absolutely.
For different purposes.
Yeah. And in addition to that too, as you look at these disaster plans and in general with emergency preparation, we talk a lot about evacuation, but there's also shelter in place. There's a right time to shelter in place. And I think talking to the authorities, talking to our emergency personnel, and other subject matter experts, they can help us decide what that looks like, when the best time is to do those things.
Are we talking about having a guest speaker in for a board meeting, like a local policeman, sheriff, something like that?
Absolutely. When we start the beginning of it, the beginning of taking a look at disaster planning, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So I think not only are we checking with neighbors and others in the locality, right? We can conduct a risk assessment, consult local authorities to determine the most likely emergencies in your area. It can include natural disasters and weather-related events or any of those others that we talked about. You want to build based on the most likely scenarios. If you're in Florida, certainly your top of the list is going to be a hurricane emergency preparedness.
Right.
But depending on what part of Virginia you're in, we have had an earthquake, but they weren't very large. So that's probably a little down, it's further down on our list. Now, if we're in a high-rise building, we may make that a higher level priority to look at.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking I like the way you introduced it at the very beginning, man-made versus the natural, environmental, the weather-related, because at a high-rise, it may be as simple as an elevator stuck or you're out of power for some reason, the emergency backup generator didn't kick in and you're struggling with zero power for X amount of time or hours. And I like the idea of not trying to worry about everything. You spoke about having the priority ideas. And so for the board members, for our audience here who's thinking about, oh, gee, this could be overwhelming. We don't want it to be overwhelming. So we're talking about 2, 3, 4, 5 things, the top 3 or 4, 5, start with that. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. As those things come up, right, we watch the news, we hear about these things that are happening, whether it's in another community or whether it's in another area. And hey, maybe that does pertain to us. What about a train derailment? What about, and that goes along with, okay, so maybe a chemical spill or a pollution disaster that our community could be affected in that. And I think that there's probably some more national types of help that you can get with that. So there are several federal and national and even local groups that they provide resources on how to prepare for natural disasters in the different types in communities, FEMA, the Red Cross, the U.S. Small Business Association. So you can lean into those as well, again, whether it's nationally or in your own area.
Yeah. Well, I hope that our audience here is starting to have their brains spin about what they can do for their owners, because I believe the Red Cross is always going to be there. I believe the police department is always going to be there, the fire department, all those other things, they're always going to be there. But I want to start with our communities here. How can we help? How can we have a list here, our rally points, our meetup points, things like that. Let's follow through on this. And I want to talk next subject about who makes these emergency plans.
Is your HOA or condo self-managed and you don't want to work as hard volunteering? Are you full managed and looking to save money? Or are you looking to split the accounting from a manager's role for better service? Let Community Financials handle the monthly accounting for you. We collect dues, pay bills, produce financial reports, include portals, and help with other support services, all while providing awesome service. We'd love the opportunity to help you make your community accounting stress-free with our industry-leading systems and expert team. Visit our website, communityfinancials.com, to learn more.
Well, Arielle, let's follow up on that idea about setting up the emergency procedures. Who has that kind of responsibility?
Well, it depends on the community that you're in, certainly. I mean, if hopefully you have on-site management. If you don't, it's okay. The board can take this on. There also are folks out there that can help in this process. But really, you're going to want to gather the relevant information, right? So it takes a little research, and that's where I said at the beginning, you've got to do your homework. So you want to understand what the detailed information is about each of those identified situations, weather events, what are the warning signs and the typical patterns, and then what really is the potential to do the most impact or have the most impact associated with each scenario, whether it's on the residents, on the buildings, or planning for what happens in a large evacuation. So Florida being another example of that, with they may have a mandatory evacuation, and so what do you do then? Really, it's creating step-by-step procedure for each of those identified situations. They should be clear actions that are to be taken before, during, and after the emergency, right? So, and I think being clear about those things, that they are different. So beyond evacuation rights or evacuation routes and locations for assembly, communication protocols. That's a huge one. How are we going to communicate this to our owners and residents, both before in preparation, during, and afterwards? Hey, it's safe to come back to the community now. Or here's an issue that we're having. Think of, on Hilton Head Island, after one of their storms, one of the communities, or a lot of the communities, had a hard time getting all of the debris out, and that caused some major issues for the owners and residents.
Just to be able to get in and out.
100%. My mom happened to live in the big neighborhood that Seapines, that was part of that, and so I, definitely hearing every day of the impact. Also, the designated roles and responsibilities for staff members and board members, that's huge. And again, it may not be a high-rise building. It could be a 100-unit townhouse community that has very, very limited amenities, and maybe a couple parks and sidewalks and things, but you still want to let folks know what to do, where they go. And so I think maybe delving into some of that. If you have staff, you want that contact information, right? And a call list. Both, so the staff knows also which vendors and contractors that they may call if there's an emergency. Again, it may not be weather related, so we may not know it's coming. It may just happen. So who's the best? The generator, the power goes off and the generator's down. Who do you call? And I guess making sure you have a backup way to call as well.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful thing to have in the main office. Again, I'm thinking high rise, where you have a section of the operation notebook. You just turn to the red section, the emergencies, and you see power, emergency generator, fire, flood, those major things. And you just open that up and call. Anyone can do that. It doesn't need to be the building engineer. It could be a receptionist, could be the janitorial staff, just someone who knows that notebook is there and we can call that number. But another idea, it could be the board.
Training volunteers as well on what to do. And we have certain scenarios. We could have a major medical situation. It could be one of the members of the staff, during the overnight shift. And someone being able to grab that manual and look to see how do we respond. It could be a third party security officer. And so making sure that people understand where that is. I really think it's important in high rise to have front desk processes, procedures, have them documented. And one thing that I know some communities do, and I think it's brilliant, is one of the first pages, they actually give a picture of what the front desk looks like and where all these different things are, right? So that's also helpful for any community volunteers that might be jumping in, or any other personnel.
Yeah. Well, there's two things I want to try to remember to talk about. One is the before, the during, and after. And I'm thinking that they find, whether they have the picture or it's obvious, they find the notebook, they open to the emergency procedures, and you've got to have a pen there, because if the building engineer has said, I called the electric company at this time, that means the next person opening that book knows it's already been done, that they're already in process.
That's a great point. Yeah, I would say with your emergency preparedness section of any kind of notebook, if it's at the front desk, you could even put it in a digital version. Have a checklist of those same things so that right there in the book, they can check it off and see, hey, what's coming up next.
Yeah, 911 called. They said they'd be here in 1 hour at 1:15 a.m., whatever the time is. So you have a log of what's going on. And then, again, to our audience, we talk a lot about board members, but this may be a wonderful time to bring the community in, where we have established floor captains or building captains. And if you're a board member and you're thinking, oh, gee, this could be overwhelming, establish a committee to help you work on these. What are the primary emergencies that we might face here, man-made or natural, weather-related, and have them feed information to the board and start to get them involved. Because, as you said, some of it is property-related, some of it is community, the owners related. And so we're talking about different elements, and to expand the board's power by getting a committee on this, is that a smart thing to do?
Absolutely. I definitely think it's important as you're going through this process, talk to the folks in the community. You may have a resident there that part of their job was creating disaster plans, or at least, they were on a committee maybe at their business. See, of course, federal government, we have government contractors, we have all sorts of folks that are helping to create disaster planning for whatever it is. Not every area is lucky to have that, but there are people that will stand up. They want to help. This is their community. They live here. They want to protect their investments, and they want to make sure that of course, that their neighbors, their own family, that they're protected as well. So I think most important things are the health and safety of every resident, every staff member, every visitor, and then the same thing, the safety of our of our buildings, of our homes.
Yeah, well, I think it boils back to community. Know your neighbors. I remember, again, one of the 1,000 times I was doing a reserve site inspection, walking down the hall, and the board member who was walking me down the hall said, "Let me stop here just a minute." And he picked up a newspaper and opened up a door and set it inside. And he says, "This is my neighbor, da-da-da-da-da. She's a flight attendant, and we just look after each other." And I just got the greatest feeling about what a great association this was. And so if there was a problem with that association, someone would know that the person in Unit 317 is out of town. Or a good Mrs. Smith, the grandma on the floor, she is visiting her grandchildren in Ohio. She's not here. We don't have to worry about her. All these things, just that boils down to knowing your neighbor and being a community at your association. Enlisting the board, enlisting the committee member. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And I want to encourage that to our listeners. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you get half the people involved and they know their neighbors, are we mostly there?
You're right. It doesn't need to be perfect. It's an ongoing process. And so it's something that any disaster plan, it should be reviewed and updated regularly. And certainly after, whether you've experienced, in your community, the surrounding areas, one of these emergency situations, or, it comes into the spotlight nationally, regionally, where we'll start hearing about this is what the best practices were, and we can implement some of those in there. Now, I think that there are some crucial things that we talk about, whether you have staff or whether this is, the board and other volunteers are taking care of these efforts and putting them together. So if you have staff, of course, you want to identify the roles, but overall, you want to identify the roles, responsibilities, and response expectations. There should be a clear chain of command and designated liaisons for for emergency responders. So if it's the building engineer, it might be one of the board members, but it's well known who does that. I think that's important to make sure that we don't have any conflicts. Someone shouldn't be saying, "Hey, let's shelter in place," and another one is saying, "Let's evacuate." So there should be written conditions under which to do either of those things, right? So shelter in place and to evacuate.
Just reviewing my notes here, we have some major things that we've established here. There's natural or man-made. You want to have a plan that is the before, the during, and after. And so just like you're talking about now, where do we go? What are we going to do? We spoke about who has done what so much, who's going to make and then the chain of command.
Yeah.
Staff, board of directors, involve the community. The afterwards, what do we do? Review annually. But I like that. Don't worry about perfect. What we're talking about is just getting the ideas going. Arielle, does anyone do a fire drill?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There are communities that do it. I think certainly doing it with staff. And when we say fire drills, we should be talking about all sorts of drills. We should be looking at what do we do when there's a fire in the garage, right? That's different than there's one in the unit. And we should be talking about that. We should be pulling out lists and going through that process. Making sure that we're doing things like taking keys, grabbing our book, but then also understanding, hey, maybe that employee was heating up their food in the break room and a fire breaks out and they don't they can't get to the desk to grab those things. So being able to make sure that, they know exactly who to go to. Hey, I can call the manager, or I can call the board president, and they have a digital copy of these materials. So, and that's knowing who has this and making making these procedures readily available to your residents. It's really important. They work with a management company. They should be reaching out to the management company as well, so that they can get assistance offsite and on-site.
Have we skipped the obvious? I just realized the association's website. Can we get someone who's responsible to say, this is the number 1 meetup spot, this is number 2 meetup spot, this is what's going on at the association? Is that part of it?
Absolutely. So when I talked about a communication plan, that can be in the moment. Let's say in high rise, that could be using the fire annunciator system to give instruction and to advise of what's happening. It could be, could be an SMS or email blast that goes out to the community before, during, after. Yeah, the website. There are so many things that we want to do here. So that communication piece really is important. How do we communicate the plan to residents? As I talked about, being prepared to give them a printed version of it, have it available online for them to get to, and as well as the staff or whomever is there, that they're educated to understand this is what someone's looking for.
Printed version, review and reinforce. Arielle, this is just a fascinating conversation. And I want to... It
is, right?
Yeah. And what we're trying to do here, again, is protect buildings and protect people. So just critical type stuff. Well, thank you for joining us today. Arielle, please let our audience know the best way to get in touch with you if they have some follow-up questions that they're just begging to ask.
Absolutely. I can be reached via email. It is Arielle Hansford at firstserviceresidential.com. So AIRIELLE Hansford, HANSFORD at FSresidential.com.
Yeah, I misspelled your first name the first time I sent you an email also. So AIRIELLE.
I am absolutely used to that. Absolutely. That's right.
Yeah, well, fascinating. Again, we hope you learned some HOA insights from our discussion today that helps you bring common sense to your common areas. We look forward to having you join us for another great episode next week.
You've been listening to HOA Insights, common sense for common areas. You can listen to the show on our podcast website, hoainsights.org, or subscribe on any of the most popular podcast platforms. You can also watch the show on our YouTube channel. Check the show notes for helpful links. If you like the show and want to support the work we do, you can do so in a number of ways. The most important thing you can do is to engage in the conversation. Email your questions or voice memos to podcast@reservestudy.com or leave us a voicemail at 805-203-3130. If you gain any insights from the show, please do us a huge favor by sharing the show with other board members you know. You can also support us by supporting the brands that sponsor this program. Please remember that the views and opinions expressed by the podcast do not constitute legal advice. You'll want to consult your own legal counsel before making any important decisions. Finally, this podcast was expertly mixed and mastered by Stokelight Video and Marketing. With Stokelight on your team, you'll reach more customers with marketing expertise that inspires action. See the show notes to connect with Stokelight.